Hello, boys and girls. How are you doing? Miss Smith here, and today I am going to start reading a new chapter book. So, what this means is when you look at the videos, make sure that you know which chapters you've already listened to and try not to listen to them out of order, okay? This story has short chapters and it's a pretty silly story. Okay, this is one of my favorite chapter books to read, and it requires you to listen and pay attention to catch the jokes that get said very subtly. And what that means is that they don't come out and just tell you what the joke is. You just have to listen and pay attention, and then you can put the clues together. Okay. So since the chapters are short, I'm going to put a couple chapters on each video for you. And let's begin. So our story is called Sideways Stories from Wayside School. And again, just like I told you, I know that I have so many favorite books. This is one of my favorite chapter books because it is so silly and so fun to listen to. Introduction. This book contains 30 stories about the children and teachers at Wayside School. But before we get to them, there is something you ought to know so that you don't get confused. Wayside School was accidentally built sideways. It was supposed to be only one story high with 30 classrooms all in a row. Instead, it is 30 stories high with one classroom on each story. The builder said he was very sorry. The children at Wayside like having a sideways school. They have an extra large playground. The children and teachers described in this book all go to class on the very top floor. So there are 30 stories from the 30th story of Wayside School. It has been said that these stories are strange and silly. That is probably true. However, when I told stories about you to the children at Wayside, they thought you were strange and silly. That is probably also true. All right, so if you look here on the cover, you can see the school that got built way up high. The way it was supposed to be built was actually this way. It was supposed to go from side to side, but they messed up and they built it all the way up. All right, they said there's only one classroom on each floor. So think about if you're taking an elevator in a really tall building and you stop at each floor, there's one classroom on each floor. Okay. Chapter 1, Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf had a long tongue and pointed ears. She was the meanest teacher in Wayside School. She taught the class on the 30th story. Let me show you Mrs. Gorf here. If you children are bad, she warned, or if you answer a problem wrong, I'll wiggle my ears, stick out my tongue, and turn you into apples. Mrs. Gorf didn't like the children, but she loved the apples. Joe couldn't add. He couldn't even count, but he knew that if he answered a problem wrong, he would be turned into an apple. So he copied from John. He didn't like to cheat, but Mrs. Gorf had never taught him how to add. One day, Mrs. Gorf caught Joe copying John's paper. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Joe into an apple. Then she turned John into an apple for letting Joe cheat. "Hey, that isn't fair," said Todd. "John was only trying to help a friend." Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Todd into an apple. "Does anybody else have an opinion?" she asked. No one said a word. Mrs. Gorf laughed and placed the 3 apples on her desk. Stephen started to cry. He couldn't help it. He was scared. "I do not allow crying in the classroom," said Mrs. Gorf. She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Stephen into an apple. For the rest of the day, the children were absolutely quiet. And when they went home, they were too scared to even talk to their parents. But Joe, John, Todd, and Stephen couldn't go home. Mrs. Gorf just left them on her desk. They were able to talk to each other, but they didn't have much to say. Their parents were very worried. They didn't know where their children were. Nobody seemed to know. The next day, Kathy was late for school. As soon as she walked in, Mrs. Gorf turned her into an apple. Paul sneezed during class. He was turned into an apple. Nancy said, "God bless you," when Paul sneezed. Mrs. Gorf wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, stuck out her tongue, and turned Nancy into an apple. Terrence fell out of his chair. He was turned into an apple. Mauricia tried to run away. She was halfway to the door as Mrs. Gorf's right ear began to wiggle. When she reached the door, Mrs. Gorf's left ear wiggled. Mauricia opened the door and had one foot outside when Mrs. Gorf stuck out her tongue. Mauricia became an apple. Mrs. Gorf picked up the apple from the floor and put it on her desk with the others. Then a funny thing happened. Mrs. Gorf turned around and fell over a piece of chalk. The three Erics laughed. They were turned into apples. Mrs. Gorf had a dozen apples on her desk. Joe, John, Todd, Stephen, Kathy, Paul, Nancy, Terrence, Mauricia, and the three Erics, Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and Eric Ovens. Lewis, the yard teacher, walked into the classroom. He had missed the children at recess. He had heard that Mrs. Gorf was a mean teacher, so he came up to investigate. He saw the 12 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. "I must be wrong," he thought. "She must be a good teacher if so many children bring her apples." He walked back down to the playground. The next day, a dozen more children were turned into apples. Lewis, the yard teacher, came back into the room. He saw 24 apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. There were only 3 children left in the class. "She must be the best teacher in the world," he thought. By the end of the week, all of the children were apples. Mrs. Gorf was very happy. "Now I can go home," she said. "I don't have to teach anymore. I won't have to walk up 30 flights of stairs ever again." "You're not going anywhere," shouted Todd. He jumped off the desk and bopped Mrs. Gorf on the nose. The rest of the apples followed. Mrs. Gorf fell on the floor. The apples jumped all over her. "Stop," she shouted, "or I'll turn you into applesauce." But the apples didn't stop, and Mrs. Gorf could do nothing about it. "Turn us back into children," Todd demanded. Mrs. Gorf had no choice. She stuck out her tongue, wiggled her ears, this time her left one first, then her right, and turned the apples back into children. "All right," said Mauricia. "Let's go get Lewis. He'll know what to do." "No," screamed Mrs. Gorf. "I'll turn you back into apples." She wiggled her ears, first her right one, then her left, and stuck out her tongue. But Jenny held up a mirror, and Mrs. Gorf turned herself into an apple. The children didn't know what to do. They didn't have a teacher. Even though Mrs. Gorf was mean, they didn't think it was right to leave her as an apple. But none of them knew how to wiggle their ears. Lewis, the yard teacher, walked in. "Where's Mrs. Gorf?" he asked. Nobody said a word. "Boy, am I hungry," said Lewis. "I don't think Mrs. Gorf would mind if I ate this apple. After all, she always has so many." He picked up the apple, which was really Mrs. Gorf, shined it up on his shirt, and ate it. All right, I'm going to stop after that first chapter for this video because there's so much to talk about that just happened in there. So Mrs. Gorf, was she a nice teacher or a mean teacher? And she was a mean teacher. She would turn the children into what? Yes, she turned them into apples. And were they always acting up, or was she just turning them into apples for everything? Yes, she turned them into apples for anything that they did. If they coughed, if they sneezed, if they spoke, if they got an answer wrong, everybody was getting turned into apples. And once everybody was an apple, she said, oh, now I can go home and I don't have to teach and I don't have to walk up 30 flights of stairs ever again. So that gave us a clue right there, boys and girls, that there is not an elevator in this school. So imagine if every day that you came to school, you had to climb up 30 flights of stairs, that you had to go all the way to the very top of that building. That'd be pretty tiresome, wouldn't it? Absolutely. And let's talk about Lewis, the art teacher. He came in to check on the students because he wasn't seeing them at recess, and he saw all these apples on Mrs. Gorf's desk. So he said, well, I heard she was mean, but if everyone's bringing her apples, she must be nice. But was everybody bringing her apples? No, they weren't. They were being turned into apples, and Lewis didn't know that. So at the very end of the chapter, when all the students got turned back into students instead of apples, Mrs. Gorf accidentally turned herself into an apple, and then Lewis ate her for lunch. So as you can see after that first chapter, boys and girls, this story is super silly and it's super fun. So that is all that I have for this video. I will upload more chapters soon.